tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. I am Penna Dexter, and as you can hear, I've been battling laryngitis. You've got to be happy, though, that I'm here today, because I don't think you would have recognized me over the weekend. Getting a lot better, but bear with me today because I will be your host, and I'm so grateful to be in the studio to discuss some very important topics today. First of all, sad news, the shooting, really the mass killing at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 11 people dead. And we will discuss that a little bit later in the program. Also, Dr. Erwin Lutzer will join me later in the program, second hour, about his new book, The Church in Babylon, Heeding the Call to be a Light in the Darkness. This book, and I know our interview will cover hot button issues of the day, and also the role of the church in this culture, which has changed dramatically. And then later, Steve Strang will join me. That's in the third hour for some of you who may be listening online. And we'll talk with him about the Trump aftershock and other issues. But right now, we've got elections coming up. And as a matter of fact, here in Texas, people are already voting. And if you haven't, it's good to vote early and get that done, just in case Election Day turns out to be busy for you. But we are going to discuss some of the election issues here in Texas, some of the things that are important to Texas. You know, we do a lot of things right here, and we have such a good economy, but we do have some challenges. And with me to talk about those is Vance Ginn, PhD. I'm so grateful to have him here because he's with this great organization that I've been learning a lot about, the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And he is the director of the Center for Economic Prosperity there. He's also a senior economist at the organization. And he's this group, Texas Public Policy Foundation, is one of the nation's premier free market think tanks. I know they even do work outside of Texas, but we're so grateful to have them and all of their experts here. Dr. Ginn is with me, and thank you so much, Vance, for being here.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, I'm glad you're here because, we look at Texas, and here on Point of View, we like to talk about how a lot of our policies are working. And, we have no state income tax here, for instance, which is really good. We make our business climate very welcoming, which means that we've got lots of businesses moving into this state. It's causing, crowding problems and things that we need to deal with. But there's one big gaping problem right now that I think voters in Texas are really concerned about. And that's the rising property taxes here. Can you talk a little bit about why that's happening?
Sure. And, we've been doing a lot of research on property taxes in Texas for really a long time, and just noting that the increasing burden that it's having on so many Texans across this great state. When you look at it, the last 20 years of data from 1996 to 2016, personal income has went up by 199%. But if you look at the total tax levy, it's up 233%. In other words, property taxes have increased by more than Texans' ability to pay. And, it's really sad when some people end up being forced out of their homes because they can't pay their property tax. And there have been attempts in the past to do something about it at the state level by maybe raising the homestead exemption. Back in 2006, there was a swap with a business franchise tax. And those efforts just really didn't lead to much relief, to where people's property taxes went down maybe for a year, and that was it. And we're really looking at some real property tax relief, and I think many voters across, and just Texans in general, are really looking for that real relief.
So people get their assessed value statement in the spring sometime, I think, and you look at that and you're like, wow, my property's really going up. And, for a minute you're like great. That's great when I sell the house. But if you're not selling the house, you're really in trouble, aren't you?
You are, yeah. And so, it should be a good thing when your property is going up if you want to sell. But if not, that just means that your appraised value is going to increase your property taxes. Now, the local jurisdiction could choose or could vote on not raising your tax rate and just leave the tax rate the same. It's called the effective tax rate, if that would bring in the same amount of property tax revenue that it did the previous year. But if they vote to increase the tax rate, well, that'll bring in more revenue and then continue to increase the burden on property taxpayers. Now, in Texas, you think we're number one in a lot of areas, and as you correctly mentioned, we're one of only 9 states without a personal income tax, which I think is a great thing for prosperity in Texas. But the property tax, according to the Tax Foundation, ranks the 6th highest burden in the nation, and then there are other reports that show it's the 4th highest. That's not something we want to be the highest in.
No, we don't. I grew up in California, and in my youth, we passed something called Prop 13, and it was the situation there was similar to what's the situation is here now, although I think it may have even been worse because the values of properties were skyrocketing like you couldn't even believe back then. And I remember lots of folks in my neighborhood who had to sell their homes because they couldn't pay the taxes. The taxes were just astronomical, and their incomes had not kept up. Same here now. So they passed this law, and they made a stopping point. And, there were problems from that. And so, certain programs, schools complained. What about here? How are we going to craft something that doesn't do a lot of damage and yet protects property owners?
Yeah, and so something we've looked at here at the Long Time with the Foundation. It's one of what's called the Texas Prosperity Promise here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. It's on our website, texaspolicy.com. And one of our key issues is really to eliminate property taxes. We've kind of thought about that property taxes. You really can never own your own home. You continually rent from the government basically forever by paying your property taxes. Because if you don't pay your property taxes, well, what happens? They could put a lien on your home and even take your home from you. And so really something as essential as property, we should have those rights to be able to own the property. And even if you go back, as I'm an economist, so I think about it from an economic perspective, you go back to Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, and what he really talked about was capital formation and accumulation. That's the way to a more wealthy society. And so property is nothing more really than capital. And if we're taxing people out of their capital, if anything you tax, you get less of it, then you're actually reducing the prosperity that you can have really over time. And so what we've really talked about here at the Foundation is by limiting government spending. You really can't lower taxes until you focus on spending. Spending is what drives taxes. And so what we've said is, look, let's just focus maybe on the school maintenance and operation property tax portion first, which is nearly half of the property tax burden in Texas. And let's do something to take state surplus dollars, state dollars, and eliminate the property tax over time. And essentially what we show is if we can limit state spending to 4%, really we'd like to be less than that, in biennial growth, so we have a 2-year budget cycle in Texas, then we could take surplus dollars and basically buy down that school maintenance and operation property tax over the course of about 11 years and have that portion totally eliminated. And I think that would be a good step in the right direction to getting people to own their homes and, again, stop getting them forced out of their homes altogether.
Vance Ginn is with me. He's from Texas Public Policy Foundation. We're going to continue to discuss this issue. It's great to lower taxes, but if you don't lower spending, it doesn't work. And so he has just related a great idea for actually reducing spending. We're going to discuss that a little bit more. I think that's a problem that faces our national government, too. So stay with us. We've got a lot more here on Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In a speech at Hillsdale College, Andrew McCarthy told the story of leading the prosecution in 1993 of the terrorist cell that bombed the World Trade Center. At the time, other government officials told him that he should read nothing into the fact that all the men in the terrorist cell were Muslims. These officials explained that the terrorist actions weren't representative of Islam because, after all, it is a religion that encourages peace. The government also portrayed the leader of the terrorist cell, Omar Abdel Rahman, as a wanton killer and unbalanced lunatic. Andrew McCarthy discovered he was anything but. He was a globally renowned scholar with a doctorate in Islamic jurisprudence from a major university in Egypt. That presented a problem. Andrew McCarthy needed to know enough about Islamic interpretation to press the case. He hoped to find inconsistency between what the Quran teaches and what the leader of the terrorist cell taught. What he found was alarming. Every time Omar Abdel Rahman quoted the Quran or other Islamic sources, he quoted them accurately. When he said that scriptures command Muslims to strike terror into the hearts of Islam's enemies, the scriptures backed him up. When he said Allah enjoined all Muslims to wage war until Islamic law was established throughout the world, the scriptures backed him up. Andrew McCarthy discovered the flaw in the oft-repeated argument that Muslim terrorists are perverting the religion of Islam. They are accurately quoting verses from the Quran. That doesn't mean that all Muslims will be terrorists. Many do not even know of these passages or have been able to contextualize them. But it does illustrate why we cannot continually argue that radical Muslims who are calling for jihad are teaching something that is contrary to Islam. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I am Penna Dexter. Excuse my voice. I'm struggling with laryngitis. Vance Ginn is my guest, and he is director of Center for Economic Prosperity at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He is a leading free market economist, and, you know, he does the research to help the state of Texas with our economic policies, which are, for the most part, very successful. And he's got his PhD from Texas Tech University. Vance, I wanted to ask you, because I've become addicted lately to a publication from your organization, The Canon, that comes out. I like it because it explains issues, but it does it very succinctly, and it informs you, but you're not reading a full policy paper. So tell us how people can get that.
Yes. So our Canon comes out daily. It hits on three major issues, really news things that are in the news each day. It's at texaspolicy.com, and there's a link on there that you can go and fill out your information and email address, and you can get that each day.
Well, there's one that came out that you wrote, Texas Needs Fiscal Transparency, and that's what we were beginning to discuss at the end of the last segment, that we've got to get a kind of a read on how we're spending our money before we enact policies, as you described, to lower property taxes, correct?
That's correct. We really do. I mean, when you look at the state, we have a paper called The Real Texas Budget. And basically I go through and catalog the last decade plus of state spending. And when you look at that, and the overall size of our budget is currently $217 billion on a biennial basis over a 2-year budget cycle. And that budget is up about 7.3% more than just growth in population inflation,
really?
Which are probably two good measures maybe of how much the government should grow by. And that means that we're spending $15 billion more in this current biennium than we otherwise would have. That's a lot more money that could be in families' pockets.
It seems strange, though, when I read what you wrote about the fact that our lawmakers can't really look and say what agencies are spending their money efficiently and well and what aren't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The budget process, the format that we use here in Texas is called a strategic budget format. And basically they break down all of the programs that we use by a a strategy. Let's say, Medicaid, for example, be a very broad measure of Medicaid, or for helping provide a healthier society. And it really doesn't give you the individual programs that are a part of that specific strategy. And so as a taxpayer, if I want to go in and look and see how they're spending my money, it is very difficult to do so. And I'm someone who's really trained on looking at the budget. So, if you're an ordinary taxpayer like my mom, she wouldn't even really know where to start.
Yeah, I wouldn't know where to start. But, voters need to be able to ask their candidates, how are they going to improve this situation? So what would be a good question to ask a candidate with regard to transparency and spending?
Yeah, whenever you're looking at it, really think about what are the programs that we're currently spending money on? And are those programs performing at the capacity that we want them to perform? In other words, are they effective? If you're trying to reduce welfare, for example, for a particular program, are you actually getting people off of welfare, or are we just expanding the program? Mm-hmm. If we're in schools, are we getting the best outcomes at our schools? Instead of just maybe spending more money on those, maybe we need some reforms on how those dollars are actually directed to schools, and maybe there should be some more ability for those principals to have more discretion over how to use those funds. I think there's a number of different areas to really look at. But when you're looking at the budget, try to make sure that it's as transparent as possible. And I think that will allow you to have more questions to think about, okay, why are we spending money on this and not on this?
Vance, Robin Hood has been around for a long time, and some districts will look at it and think it's great, and others don't. And, there has to be some sort of way to move money around so that poorer districts can get some help. But a lot of people don't think Robin Hood is the way. And since we're talking property taxes here, mm-hmm. do you have any good suggestions for school financing that I know it's going to be tackled? At least it should be in the legislature.
Well, there's currently the Texas School Finance Commission, which was a bill that was passed during the special session last year. And they're continuing to look at different ways to reform the funding side, and also meaning the revenue side, and also the distribution. How do we spend those dollars? And we've been in talks with them on the legislators on how best to go about that. And Robin Hood is an increasing issue for many people across the state. As your home values go up, which we would ordinarily, as you mentioned earlier, if you're going to sell your home, that's a good thing. But if your values go up, it could push you in such a situation to where you're bringing in, quote unquote, too much revenue determined by our funding formulas that are determined by our state legislators. And then those dollars are then captured by the state and then sent to other areas that don't have as much of property tax funds and other sort of education funding, to make sure that we have an equalized system to where students are receiving, close to the same amount across the state. There are some other minor differences, but this Robin Hood is a major issue, and I think needs to be really done away with. And that's one way that I was mentioning earlier with our property tax reform plan, which we have a paper on this called Abolishing the Robin Hood School Property Tax, and it's up on our website, texaspolicy.com. But really a big part of that is to say, look, the state is already determining the funding formulas for all of education across the state. Why is it that we have a local property tax coming in the bucket first, and then the state just filling up the rest of the bucket? Why not just have the state fund that entire funding formula all across the state, and then allow for the local school districts to then have the discretion to use those dollars however they see fit? And I think that starts with limiting spending, as we mentioned earlier, and then finding ways to use state surplus dollars to then eliminate those property tax, which is nearly half the property tax in Texas.
Any parent who's listening knows, if they have kids in public schools, that the schools are always complaining they don't have enough money. But yet you see some schools that their building projects are unbelievable. Seems to be maybe unnecessary. Do you see a lot of that?
We do see a lot of that. I mean, you have some places like La Jolla ISD that recently built a water park.
You're kidding.
No, they built a water park. And you have other ones that are building these huge sports complexes. And some of that's done through bonds, right? A lot of it's done through bonds that our voters are supposedly approving, but a lot of that ends up being special interests. They're the ones that end up going out to vote, and that's another reason why we've said, look, if we're going to have these bond elections, let's have it on a uniform election date in maybe November or just in the spring, instead of having it at a time when only the interested parties will come out and vote. And that's also a part of just budget and transparency, voting transparency overall. You also have a lot of superintendents that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is that the best use of funds? I really think that quality teachers should be paid more than they are today. I mean, if you think about it, what's really going to contribute the most to our kids' education? Well, it's the parents, of course, first, right? I think we've gotten too far away from that. And then next is really the teacher that's in the classroom. And too often you see a lot of the dollars that are spent on education are not spent for instruction. They're spent on buildings. They're spent on teaching aids, which some of those are necessary, but do we need as many as we do today, or just on administration? And so if we take some of that out, I think we can start to
that's
have
one
more money.
area where I think I had one of your colleagues, Andrew Andrzejewski, on about the numbers of administrators in schools. Really, you just have to scratch your head and wonder. I mean, even without seeing all their job descriptions, why we need so many, and maybe you could drop a few of those and add those salaries to the people that are really touching the kids directly.
Yeah, just to put a fine point on that, from 1993 to 2015, so 22 years, student enrollment increased by about 48% across the state. Well, teachers increased by 56%, but non-teaching staff increased by 66%.
Oh, man.
It's a huge increase. And if non-teaching staff would have just increased at the same rate as student enrollment, we could have saved $2.2 billion a year. That's B with a billion.
That's real money.
That's real money. And you could increase teacher pay or benefits by about $6,000 per teacher. And so I think those are really things we need to look at, is the proper use of each taxpayer dollar.
Vance, thank you so much for explaining these things to us. I really appreciate it. I want to mention, ladies and gentlemen, that you can go to our website, pointofview.net. You can see Dr. Ginn's picture. Click on that. You can click through to Texas Public Policy Foundation. Tell me again about the one paper about Robin Hood, where they can find that, Vance.
Yeah, so it's on our website at texaspolicy.com, and the paper is Abolishing the Robin Hood School Property Tax. I also have a nice little blog post that I tweeted out earlier at Vance Ginn. That's my Twitter handle, that just breaks it down as well in there. But I really would hope some of your viewers would check it out.
I hope so, too. And I've also posted two pieces by Vance Ginn, one on the property tax burden, one on fiscal transparency. Vance, thank you so much. I hope you'll come back.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Thank you for sticking with me here at Point of View, even with my post-laryngitis voice. And we are Point of View, and I'm so glad to have you here. You know, I was just talking with Vance Ginn of the Texas Public Policy Foundation and mentioning their publication you can get on a feed and have it sent daily to your email inbox. It's called The Cannon, C-A-N-N-O-N. And it's really interesting stories. I found one, and since it's almost Halloween, I thought I would relate this one to you. It also it takes place in a town that I lived in for 5 years, Chesapeake, Virginia, which is in the Tidewater area of Virginia. And it says the city of Chesapeake is attempting to keep the trick part of trick-or-treating to a minimum by threatening jail time for Halloween troublemakers over 12 years old. The city says it won't be actively seeking out violations. This is reported by CBS News. But it will, it's cracking down on trick-or-treating. And Texas Public Policy Foundation of this policy that they have says that the law is just more needless over-criminalization. The city's ordinance code states that if anyone over 12 participates in trick-or-treat or any similar activity, they can be guilty of a misdemeanor and shall be punished by a fine of not less than $25 or more than $100 or by confinement in jail. Wow, all for trick-or-treating. So be careful out there, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of other pieces by TPPF before we move on. I just was interested to see a couple of their other reports. As we look at elections here in Texas, it's always good to remember that Texas leads the United States in our business climate. There's a new report out that says that, and certainly Greg Abbott and others have been saying that in their campaign speeches. But the Governor Abbott, says more Texans are working than ever before as the Lone Star State leads in private sector job creation. Over the month, over the year, and over the past 10 years, jobs in Texas are now on pace for the strongest growth in 4 years. It's not accidental, though. Our policies certainly make that happen. And TPPF says Governor Abbott's right, limited government, which translates into lower taxes and less regulation, has enabled Texas business to grow. But, of course, we still need to get control of spending. And there's another, Vance wrote another piece. You can find it at their website, that the private sector continues robust job creation, which we know here in Texas. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are some interesting stories you can find, and I think that will be an organization that will be able to contribute to our program, especially during this hour when we deal in Texas issues a lot more. And here's another one. Speaking of the election, of course, there's a big one between Ted Cruz and Robert O'Rourke, Beto O'Rourke. And I've posted a piece at pointofview.net. You can click on that, on the program, pointofview.net, and then you can go to the guest and scroll way down, and you'll see this article, O'Rourke opposes religious liberty for adoption agencies. Certainly we've heard about his positions on various issues. For instance, he has promised to impeach the president and Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. He also wants abortion on demand at taxpayer expense and for illegal aliens and also for any reason, even sex selection. He also is really in favor of socialized medicine, even if it means raiding Medicare. He's calling it, and many others call it Medicare for all. It sounds great. It would be astronomically expensive. Abandoning fossil fuels is another one of his positions, abolishing ICE, and many other socialist positions. So this one is also, I guess, not for religious liberty, because at a recent campaign rally in Texas, he remarkably claimed that in this state with 30,000 kids in the foster care system, they say that under the guise of religious liberty, you can be too gay to adopt one of those children who needs a loving home. That's the way he put it. What the real situation is that we passed a law here in Texas in 2017 under which faith-based adoption agencies are allowed to decline to place children with same-sex couples. There are faith-based adoption agencies, probably most faith-based adoption agencies do not think that children should be raised in homes with same-sex parents. They think children should have a mom and a dad. And so they've been able to take that position. In some states, the adoption agencies that took that position have had to close down. But in Texas, we protected them because we believe in religious liberty here. But that is not a good thing, according to Beto O'Rourke. Texas law does not prevent anyone from adopting. Remember that. But it also protects people in a sense that if an agency can't work with a same-sex couple who wants to adopt, they must direct that couple to another agency that will work with them. But they are not required to violate conscience, violate religious beliefs. Catholic Charities has closed in several places in the country, for instance. Buffalo, New York, most recently announced the termination of their adoption program because of state requirements that would have compelled the charity to place children with same-sex couples. It's also happened in Philadelphia recently. Years ago, I think it was the whole state of Massachusetts closed down their Catholic charity. San Francisco, California, they've closed because of this requirement. So in Texas, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And in a sense, I think that when he would say something like that, and this article by David Clausen at National Review, which I posted, states this. It says that more likely than anything, it doesn't really show that Beto O'Rourke understands Texas law. Instead, it exposes a prejudiced view of the religious beliefs of millions of Americans who believe children deserve a mother and a father. And, that's what's happening, I think, with Beto O'Rourke. And that is that, you see the signs all over the state. You see surprising people in your neighborhood that you wouldn't expect would support someone so far to the left. But people do not realize his positions on things. And this is another one that I thought that I would expose. I'm sorry, dealing with a little laryngitis here. In late August, after nearly 95, this is so sad, ladies and gentlemen, after nearly 95 years of providing adoption and foster care services, Catholic Charities of Buffalo, New York, announced the termination of their adoption program. Think of how many people that affects, of all the kids that won't be placed or, that they'll have to scramble to find other agencies. Think about adoption agencies and how adoption is a picture of how Christ adopts us, really, and God, through Christ, adopts us as children. We are adopted into his family. So it is faith-based organizations very often that found and form adoption agencies. They should be allowed to operate under their faith tenets. So that's an article that you can go to and check out. I also want to mention that in this election, there is a lot at stake, and if you look across the country, there are other elections, kind of other races where some of the things that we do in Texas right are, there are issues in other states too. And I wanted to mention a couple of them because it's just kind of, it's telling in a sense to think about how these policies work time and time again. And if you don't abide by them, if you don't follow them, they don't work. And I'm thinking of one state that was written up by Kim Strassel last week in the Wall Street Journal, and that's Alaska, which tended to be conservative but has gone off the rails a little bit lately. And it's actually having a real struggle in its economy. I mean, one of the reasons is because of oil prices there. But they are looking at now going back and electing some conservatives because some of the things that have been implemented there have not been working and have been affecting their economy. And so Alaska, basically, it's normally not much on the national radar screen, but at this point it is, and it's possible now that they're going to get a new governor who may bring back some, pro-business policies. the outcome, as polls predict there, and they call it the last frontier there in elections, puts Republican Mike Dunleavy in the governor's mansion. He's 57. He's a former state senator, and he's 6'7" tall there. But what's really resonating about him is his promise to expand their economy rather than their government. And that has kind of been that's been the policy here in Texas. And we'll talk a little bit more about this after the break, because I think if you parallel some of the things that Alaska has done and some of the things Texas has done, you'll see why Alaska is in trouble. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We'll have more, A Point of View. We'll be back after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Liberty Christian Center in Watertown, New York, asked for permission to use the Watertown High School cafeteria for its religious services. As their application stated, the worship services to be conducted in the public school cafeteria would include activities of music, religious instruction, and Christian testimony. But the local school board denied the application, stating that since New York law did not specifically authorize religious organizations to utilize public school buildings, the application had to be denied. The court reviewed previous uses of the public school cafeteria. It found that among other uses, the school had been used to host a local talent night, which featured religious music, religious instruction, and even Christian testimony. Since both the worship service and the local talent show shared a religious purpose and context, it was unlawful for the school to permit the talent show but deny the use of the facility for a worship service. Some decry the use of a public school by a religious organization as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. That is simply not true. The First Amendment demands that the school board be neutral toward religion. Letting a secular organization use school property but denying a religious organization the same use is not neutrality, it's hostility. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're talking elections here on Point of View, and I mentioned the one in Alaska, which is quite interesting. Kim Strassel says this is where the GOP might win. One candidate, Mr. Walker, has actually pulled out. He was running as an independent, Bill Walker. He was elected. He did everything wrong in response to the oil crisis. He was unable to win in a Republican primary, so he was elected as an independent and proceeded to govern like a Democrat. That's what Kim Strassel says. And then they had a shortfall, sort of a budget hole, because of the drop in oil prices there in Alaska. And he really did some of the wrong things. He didn't cut very much to respond adequately to this crisis. And he signed Alaska up for Obamacare's Medicaid expansion, which piled more costs upon the state. And then, of course, Alaska suffered from this oil hit because they're so dependent on oil revenue there. But the government response contributed to what's been really a big problem now. The state has the highest unemployment rate in the country, 6.5%. That's as of September. Their economic growth in the state is almost non-existent, and foreclosures have soared there. But Mr. Walker's biggest political mistake was slashing Alaska's permanent fund. This may sound counterintuitive, but in Alaska, of course, people just count on this annual income that they get because of oil. And, of course, that's not there right now. But in history, it's been there. So when people who counted on this stopped getting it, that was regressive in a sense in the state. So a lot of politicians are promising to restore that. Anyway, it didn't help that Mr. Walker lectured that he was actually saving that fund for the future as he was slashing people's payouts. So he's not very popular, and it looks like Mr. Dunleavy is going to win the governorship. It is, Ms. Strazel says it's unpopular enough when legislators raise taxes. See what happens when you deny that payout that they expect and depend on annually. But we will see what happens on Election Day, but the polls are looking pretty good for the Republican there. His focus is on embracing the new private sector opportunities now that the Trump administration is reversing the effective Obama moratorium on oil and gas development. So that's going to help Alaska as it's helped Texas. And so we'll see what happens there. But Mr. Walker's name, he's actually withdrawn now. So there'll be a race between a Democrat and a Republican. His name has been, it's on the ballot, but it's really not, he's not officially a candidate anymore. There are high stakes, though, in some of these states. There's another state, Connecticut, where actually, even though it's a fairly liberal part of the country, there have been Republican governors that have been very successful there and people that are moderate to conservative. And in Connecticut, but they haven't had that for a while. They've had people from the far left, like the Governor Malloy, who's been there. And the state's economy has shrunk under him 9.3%, actually, since 2007. Maybe not totally under him, but his predecessor, too. And so Connecticut citizens are saying there's time for a change there in that state. And it's possible, not probable, but possible, that the Republican candidate there, Bob Stefanowski, he's a former executive at UBS and GE and General Electric, and he's offering an economic rescue plan to Connecticut. He wants to eliminate the state estate tax so fewer retirees flee from Connecticut to Florida. That makes sense. He wants to repeal its corporate tax over 2 years to attract more businesses and phase out individual income taxes over 8 years to retain the young and successful. Apparently, Mr. Malloy grew spending without restraint on public worker benefits. That's been a problem in a lot of states. So it's caused big financial problems in some state budgets. Mr. Malloy, Governor Malloy, re-amortized state pension payments to reduce costs in the short term, but he stuck taxpayers with a larger tab over the long haul. And I was recently in Connecticut, in a very a lovely city that's sort of it's a place where New Yorkers take the train in to work in the city. And beautiful homes there. And there's really some struggle going on in that state. So you can see even a state that's filled with, rich people can be struggling because the state just begins to try to raise taxes and depend more and more on its wealthy taxpayers to fund the whole state. So as Mr. Malloy, this governor in Connecticut, leaves office as the second most unpopular governor in America, after Oklahoma's Mary Fallin, I guess she's the most unpopular. There is another Democrat candidate coming in. He says he's different, but he promises more of the same. And this other candidate, Bob Stefanowski, he's really pledging to change course. So in Connecticut, there's it's just some races to watch, ladies and gentlemen. And as you go to the polls here and you vote and you think about the future of Texas, we cannot be complacent here. We have to remember that it's only the right policies that allow a state to do well and be a good place to live, be a prosperous community. You always have to stay on top of your preferred elected candidates, those you've helped elect. You absolutely have the right then to pressure them throughout the time that they are in office. And I think, one of the philosophies we have here in Texas is that we need to have citizen legislators. Some states have professional legislators. And as many of you know, our legislature only meets every other year in the odd year. So it will meet in January of 2019. So when you're voting for your state representative, your state senator, those people are going to head down to Austin for 5 months every other year. So this January, they'll head down and they'll start talking about things like property taxes, which we discussed earlier. They'll be talking about some things that never got done in the last legislature because we did have some people in leadership in the House. Even though it's controlled supposedly by Republicans, there were some, I guess you could call them rhinos. They didn't seem as if they were really on board with conservative ideas, and they kept some really good legislation bottled up. It never even got voted on. Some things that would have, like for instance, protecting the bathrooms in Texas and the locker rooms from being opened up to all genders or whatever people thought they were that day. That never happened, even here in conservative Texas. So I just want to kind of encourage you. Go to the polls, take your friends, take a few people and encourage those friends. Go to pointofview.net to our Take Action button there, and you can find out about your candidates. You can see voter guides there, and you can share those with friends and help them to understand, because I know that if you're paying attention, you have a lot of friends who are not. So you can multiply your influence by just helping them understand who the best people are to elect and to vote for. So I hope you'll do that. Again, that's pointofview.net. And by the way, while you're there, you know that we are a listener-supported ministry, and we appreciate your gifts, your donations. We have a donate button there, really for the protection of your family. You need to be informed about issues that are so important to us across the nation. We've been around a long time, helping you understand them. As we'll find out from our next guest, I'm so excited to interview Dr. Erwin Lutzer. Things have really changed in the culture. There's no longer a Christian consensus, and we are to the point now where we're almost, in a sense, living in Babylon. He's written a book about it, and he is going to join me after the break. I hope you'll stay with us for that next interview. And also, we will open up the phones, 800-351-1212, for your calls and your questions. So just remember our donate button at pointofview.net and stay with us. We'll be back.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. If you are just tuning in, you'll notice my voice is a little strange today. I've been struggling with laryngitis, and I'm kind of on the tail end of it, and everybody is being so nice with water and tea and honey here on the program, so bear with me. But ladies and gentlemen, if you are a listener to this program and you pay attention to the culture, I mean, if you're a listener, you do pay attention. That is why you're listening to Point of View. You know that things are very different now, today. Our culture has become more secular. It has been altered greatly by the sexual revolution over the past few decades. It is very different because of technology. And really, you look at us, and we no longer have a Christian consensus, which we did have here in America. So it changes things. It's almost as if we are like the Israelites living in Babylon. And that's why I'm so excited for our next guest. He is a frequent guest here on Point of View over the years, Dr. Erwin Lutzer. And he has written a new book called The Church in Babylon, Heeding the Call to be a Light in Darkness. He's pastor emeritus of the Moody Church in Chicago, and he served as senior pastor there for 36 years. And he is the featured speaker on radio programs that are heard on more than 1,000 outlets in the U.S. and around the world. He's written so many great books. I think one of my favorites, besides this one that I've just read and enjoyed, we'll be discussing. This one is The Church in Babylon, but I loved When a Nation Forgets God, and it's sort of along those themes. But we've progressed, and not for the better since then. Dr. Lutzer, thank you very much for joining me today.
I'm so glad to be with you today, Penna.
Well, it's good to have you, and you've written this book, The Church in Babylon. And, I mean, I don't think you're going to disagree with me that we just don't have a Christian consensus, one that we once relied on, correct?
No, we certainly don't. And America is very fractured, I should say. And that's true not only politically, but morally, and in every way, of course, also language-wise. You have diverse languages. And so we're living in a nation in which we are a minority in the midst of a majority pagan culture. And I mention that because I think when I look in the Old Testament, one of the best examples of the church today is when Israel was in Babylon. They faced a culture with a different language, with a different lifestyles, different morality, and they were supposed to survive there and be a witness for God in the midst of that culture. And so that's why I see parallels.
Well, you make them in so many, throughout this book, which, ladies and gentlemen, I highly recommend it. And you can get it a couple of different ways, which we'll discuss later. But the church has become, in a sense, then, the church has a job to do, but it's not doing it, correct?
Well, you know, some of the churches are, and I think that not all the problems in America can be laid at the door of the church. The problem is that we have a real challenging to be welcoming in our society, even when we get to sexual issues, as I'm sure we will on this program. We have to be welcoming but not affirming. And the problem is that churches under pressure are buckling today in some very important areas, not just in the realm of sexuality. So what I try to do in the book is to help us to understand that Israel in Babylon, God gave them certain instructions. They could go along with their culture to a certain extent. Certainly Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel did that, but they also had to draw a line in the sand and to say, we can do this, but we cannot do that. And that's why you have that dramatic passage in the 3rd chapter of Daniel where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, we will not bow. We can do some things, but we refuse to submit to the gods of Babylonian culture.
Dr. Lutzer, when a person who's a Christian tries to make that sort of determination, what will we do and where will we draw the line? We are called to be faithful to our faith, to our beliefs, to our Bible, the Word of God. But what does that look like today where, as you said, sometimes you have to be welcoming and other times you have to hold the line?
Well, I'll give you a very good example of that, and I think I refer to it in the book. Someone here at Moody Church who teaches in the public school system here in Chicago said that he was told it is not enough for him to simply tolerate same-sex marriage. If he doesn't celebrate it, he could lose his job. So there's a line in the sand. Can a Christian teacher teach in a school where same-sex marriage is perhaps tolerated? Can he participate, however, in that and celebrate it? No. So I think that everyone who's listening, if they are in the workforce today, has to ask themselves, where is my line? Where am I able to say, yes, I can go along with this, even though I disagree with it, but I cannot cross the line? Think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were advisors to a wicked king, Nebuchadnezzar, whose armies took Jewish babies and threw them against the rocks.
And yet they remained there. They remained as advisors.
Yet they remained there as witnesses, and they were able to associate with the king, maybe even helping him in some respects, but they had to draw a line in the sand, and when he said, you bow or you get the furnace, they feared God more than they did the furnace, and so they were willing to not bow. And the trouble with the church today is that it is very difficult for some churches to draw a line in the sand and say, here we stand. For example, since we're talking about sexual issues, and that often comes up, the word love and unity and acceptance and tolerance is being defined today in ways that are contrary to Scripture. So you have a lot of churches giving in on these areas, not willing to lovingly hold the line and to say, here we stand. So the burden of my book and of my heart for the church is to say, to try to help us determine where those lines are, but also to recognize that we cannot give in to the culture. We're living at a time, Penna, when the culture is influencing us more than we are influencing the culture. And so that's the position of the church today.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are speaking with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, and he will be with us for the entire hour. You won't want to miss the rest of this. There is so much here that is, it's just necessary wisdom for us living in the times that we're living in and the nation that we're living in. And to be a church and to be a positive part of the solution. The book, again, is available. And Dr. Lutzer, I know you wanted to talk about that, but you can get it by linking through to pointofview.net. And so you can do that during the break. It's pointofview.net. You can see Dr. Lutzer's picture in his bio. And just click on that. You can find out where to get the book. He'll also give you some thoughts on that. But ladies and gentlemen, I just want to encourage you to stay with us because we're going to talk about questions like how do we engage the culture without being contaminated by it. We'll talk about it right after this here on Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, in a speech at Hillsdale College, Andrew McCarthy told the story of leading the prosecution in 1993 of the terrorist cell that bombed the World Trade Center. At the time, other government officials told him that he should read nothing into the fact that all the men in the terrorist cell were Muslims. These officials explained that the terrorist actions weren't representative of Islam because, after all, it is a religion that encourages peace. The government also portrayed the leader of the terrorist cell, Omar Abdel-Rahman, as a wanton killer and unbalanced lunatic. Andrew McCarthy discovered he was anything but. He was a globally renowned scholar with a doctorate in Islamic jurisprudence from a major university in Egypt. That presented a problem. Andrew McCarthy needed to know enough about Islamic interpretation to press the case. He hoped to find inconsistency between what the Quran teaches and what the leader of the terrorist cell taught. What he found was alarming. Every time Omar Abdel-Rahman quoted the Quran or other Islamic sources, he quoted them accurately. When he said that scriptures command Muslims to strike terror into the hearts of Islam's enemies, the scriptures backed him up. When he said Allah enjoined all Muslims to wage war until Islamic law was established throughout the world, the scriptures backed him up. Andrew McCarthy discovered the flaw in the oft-repeated argument that Muslim terrorists are perverting the religion of Islam. They are accurately quoting verses from the Quran. That doesn't mean that all Muslims will be terrorists. Many do not even know of these passages or have been able to contextualize them. But it does illustrate why we cannot continually argue that radical Muslims who are calling for jihad are teaching something that is contrary to Islam. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. My guest, Dr. Erwin Lutzer, Pastor Emeritus of the Moody Church. You've heard him on this program as he's been interviewed by Kirby for many of his great books that he's written. And he's really an observer of the culture. And I think pastors and churches, Dr. Lutzer, in the culture that we have right now, they have a great role to play. And so, as you said, some churches do well, and other churches are actually becoming too much like the culture, aren't they?
They really are. And you know, Penna, in light of what I heard Kirby just say about Islam, I hope that at some point, maybe in the last segment, you ask me about my chapter on immigration, because it does relate to Islam, but it also does relate to the present thing that we're seeing on television.
Absolutely. It's a great chapter.
Actually, back to your original question, absolutely. There are some churches that are being co-opted by the culture. Now, I use this illustration. The church is to be in the world as a ship is in the ocean. But when the ocean gets into the ship is in trouble. And in many respects, I think that the ocean is getting into the ship. You know, one of the things I try to do is to look at our culture and to say to ourselves, what is our Babylon like? And we can get back to ancient Babylon and the Jews, but our Babylon is a very different kind of Babylon. And that's why I have a chapter, for example, on technology, which I think is really destroying our culture and destroying our young people in many respects. And I mention that because that's an example of how we are being co-opted by the culture, where the same videos, the same movies, the same kinds of shows that are watched by the world are now widely seen by Christians. And what it does is it corrodes our souls in many respects, and it hampers our witness. And so what we have to do is to be able to say, and it isn't an easy question with an easy answer. Maybe it's an easy question, but it doesn't have an easy answer. How do we become a church that is of the world, in the world, but not of the world, and not co-opted by the world? And that's a very delicate balance that we must have, but that's what we must strive for.
You know, you mentioned your chapter on technology. I thought it was a very practical chapter. In a sense, the church does have a big role to play in this area of technology because it's sort of new in a sense that people don't know how to deal with it. And it can be used. I mean, it's there and we're not going to get rid of it. It can be used for good or evil. And in a sense, I think we have to train the people that are sitting in the pews how to use it.
Exactly. And, it's true. Of course, technology is being used for good. You and I are hooked up today by a telephone, which is technology. We use the Internet here at the Moody Church to touch various countries within the whole world, and most churches do that. You have all these ministries. But the point that I make is that technology itself is not neutral. It is weighted against us. You turn on your computer, you have provocative pictures, even if you're watching the news. The temptation to go to the next picture, and the next picture is so great. I mentioned that a mother said to me, I didn't know that when I was giving my teenage daughter a cell phone, that in effect I was giving her first shot of heroin.
Ooh.
And she mentioned that because technology is almost instantly addictive. And so what's happened is young people today aren't reading books very much anymore. They are watching videos. They are texting each other. There's something about technology that is very seductive, not to mention all of the pornography and all of the negativity that there is on there. Even the best of technology can be a tremendous distraction. So here at the Moody Church, for example, I sometimes preached on these issues. First of all, the first line of defense is, of course, the parents, but the church also has a role in training the parents, in warning them, and introducing them to ways in which this can be controlled. And, of course, you can get into all kinds of filters and so forth. But even more than that, the parents' necessity to supervise their children, to watch what their children are learning in school, absolutely hugely important.
Dr. Lutzer, there's one area that's also, in a sense, surprising and new to the culture that we didn't deal with until fairly recently. I never thought that the transgender push would take hold. I thought that those pushing gay rights are kind of embarrassed by that, and it surprised me. But but now you can't say anything in some circles about transgenderism. In other circles where the church needs to say something, it doesn't know what to say. It's afraid of offending and afraid of not being welcoming to people that are struggling. But when you write of transgenderism in your book, in the church, you write with a particular compassion. How did that come about?
Well, it came about because we have to recognize that there are those within our congregations who struggle with transgenderism, with homosexual desire, same-sex attraction. And I make the point, Penna, that as pastors, we can't pretend that that's a problem outside of the church as if it doesn't exist within our walls. Of course it exists within our walls. So we have to deal with it, and we have to deal with it with compassion. We have to listen to people, but we also need to know how to instruct them. Now, in the chapter that you referenced, I want to just come to the crux of the issue. In it, I tell the story of a 53-year-old man who was married and has children, but he now identifies as a 6-year-old girl, so he plays with dolls and so forth. Now, the question I have to ask is, does he have a body problem or does he have a mind problem? I tell the story of a man who had his arm amputated because he never really felt that his arm was a part of who he was. Okay, does he have a body problem or does he have a mind problem? And what contemporary society has said is you must change your body to conform to your mind. So if you think that you are a girl even though you were born a boy, then you're a girl, and you have to mutilate your body to bring in that harmony. I argue that even where there isn't change, what we must recognize is the need for us to stay in the body and the sexuality that we have been born in. Maybe I can help the parents out there very quickly in saying this. If a child comes to you and says, you know, I'm a boy, but I think I'm a girl, or the other way around, first of all, listen to them very carefully. They have a right to be heard. Secondly, remind yourself that 80% of all teenagers who think they are transgender aren't, and they recognize that later. But here's what you have to do. You have to explain to them the difference between good grief and bad grief. Bad grief is when I say, I feel I'm born with the body of a boy, but I feel I'm a girl, so I'm going to go through the surgery and become feminine. Because what you are trying to do is you're trying to bring about that alignment, but you're doing it in a way that will backfire. It'll be a pursuit that you take on for the rest of your life without ever really being content, and that's been proven many times. Or what you can do is to say, I'm struggling with this, and I'm going to have some good grief. I'm going to mourn the fact that I haven't been able to enter into normalcy like others seem to have. But in that grief, there is hope. The grief that overcomes is the grief that recognizes this is an issue for me, but I'm going to accept it. And then in the book, I argue also for celibacy. It is highly exalted in the scriptures, and it should be today for those who struggle with same-sex marriage as well as those who struggle with transgenderism. So that's, I think, where we are in today's society, and we have to, as a church, deal with these issues and pretend they don't exist.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you see why I think this is such an important book? Because chapter by chapter, there's wisdom there for dealing with some of these things that are so tough, that require love, that require not walking on eggshells, but being careful of people, and yet strong stances against sin and against evil and against things that are destructive, like, for instance, changing your body to deal with a perceived gender dysphoria that you're experiencing. Ladies and gentlemen, when parents allow their child to do that, it's child abuse. We have so much more to talk about here on the program today. Here's a question. Should you as a Christian parent go to your child's same-sex wedding? We'll ask Dr. Lutzer.
From Graceworks Pictures comes Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather.
It is with great honor that I have served my country. But I only stand before you today because Jesus is my rock, and because I have a family who loves and believes in me.
One marriage, one family, under God. Indivisible. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at indivisiblemovie.com.
A major problem with socialism is that it allows people to benefit from the hard work of others. It permits the idle and indifferent to live off the efforts of their neighbors. For a society to prosper, everyone who is able has to contribute, and that's the only way Point of View Radio can bring you truth. We are profoundly thankful for you who have joined the Truth Team and make this program possible. If you're not on board, join today. Invest in our future together. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And my guest is Dr. Erwin Lutzer, and the book we are discussing, his latest of many, The Church in Babylon, Heeding the Call to be a Light in the Darkness. And I actually could do probably 10 shows on this book, because every chapter, Dr. Lutzer, has a topic that's a hot button, and then the role of the church and things that the church needs and could do, or how the church can step up to the plate here, are all things that we discuss all the time here on Point of View. And you've put it all in this book, and with great wisdom from your years of being a pastor and radio host. So I appreciate your doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to open the phones, 800-351-1212. Questions only. You can make a quick statement, but we don't want to have long commentary. We want to hear from Dr. Lutzer, but if you've got a question for him, by all means call us, 800-351-1212. But Dr. Lutzer, just back to transgender, and I think it ties into technology, because there was a recent professor at Brown University who talked about, she did some research on transgender being a social contagion, and kids in high school, especially girls, coming up and along with their friends, they're all stating now, I'm not comfortable in the gender I was born in, and I'm going to now present as the opposite. So, and then this is being affirmed by websites. So, here's a big problem that, and it's not, this is, in a sense, may not be a mental problem, but more of a social problem, correct?
Oh, it really is. And when you look into transgenderism, by the way, almost always there are other issues involved, whether or not it's bullying or a sense of rejection, insecurity, depression, etc. And I'm not surprised that many kids think they are, because they get the pressure from society that you might be, so experiment to see whether you are, just like, you might experience or experiment to see whether or not you are gay and have same-sex attraction. Let's remember that we are human beings who can be conditioned. Here at the Moody Church, there were 2 college students, 2 girls who had no lesbian desires whatever, but they got into lesbian pornography, and pretty soon they began to act on it and then say, we think that this is the direction of, quote, who we really are. Now, there may be some who are born with a propensity toward that direction. We recognize that. But a lot of what is happening is actually social conditioning, and our present culture is not helping at all. It is hindering. It is filled with all kinds of lies, and impressionable young people are picking up on it and acting on those lies.
Yeah, with repercussions that sometimes can be irreversible, and that's one of the sad parts about it. Let me ask you, I want to go back, because before the break I asked, for your advice on if your child is going to, quote unquote, marry the same sex, should you go? And I think this kind of gets back to Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego bowing down, and in for some people, it would be appropriate to go, but, some people just would say, no, that's just a bridge too far. What do you think?
Well, for me, certainly it is a bridge too far, and I would advise against going. Affirm your love for the child, but just simply say, I cannot agree with what you're doing. Now, there may be some parents who think out of love for their child they should attend, etc., even if they don't participate. And we need to give them some slack. But here's the point I make in the book, twice, actually. It is much better to tell people the truth, even if you are thought to be harsh, than to whisper lies with a sense of caring and love and thoughtfulness. So we as a culture need to be able to tell the truth. But let's do it lovingly. Let's do it often with broken hearts. Let's do it with tears. But let's do it. And so my concern is that love oftentimes is being used to overwhelm and to actually trump, if I might use that word, the clear teaching of the Bible in certain issues, such as same-sex attraction.
You know, so many of the issues that we're dealing with now come back to the quote-unquote LGBTQ agenda that I think that in a sense the way our society, our secular society has handled it, it's become a weapon against the church. And the church really has to figure out how to deal with it, because if we do is what you just described with overemphasizing love and not wanting to offend, for instance, then we are a contributor to the problem.
You know, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. So let's remember that love in the Bible is not left undefined for us to figure out what is loving and what isn't. It's keeping the commandments and being biblical. But going back to what you said about the church, every person listening who's a member of a church or the leader of a church, every church has to write its constitution in such a way that they take into account the present pressure. You need an attorney to help you. There are organizations that help you. But what you must do is to try to have a firewall. We did that here at Moody Church a couple of years ago, so that if somebody came to us and said, you know, we're same-sex attracted and you rent out your facilities, you have to include us, we can point to our Constitution, we can point to our biblical point of view that is in the Constitution, and we can point to the legal aspects and say no. So we can't live like we used to, where the church was in charge and could do whatever it wanted to do, and there was that freedom of religion. There was a time when we were just wrong, but we are now at a time where we are not only wrong, but we are illegal. And once the society makes that leap, we have to be ready for it.
We really do. You know, and I think we're assuming here churches who take a biblical stand on things. And here's another part of the book that I thought was so interesting, Dr. Lutzer, and that is where you identify 5 doctrinal temptations within evangelicalism, because some of our churches are being, I don't know, they're moving off center in a way. And I want to pick just one of those 5 to ask you about, because I think it's just very interesting to me right now. That is the gospel of social justice, which social justice means different things to different people. And I think same-sex marriage is part of it, socialism, freedom from economic and social oppression. But can you talk about how some churches are taking that to perhaps taking it away from the real gospel?
Absolutely. One of the points that I make, and you're referring to the chapter in which I say that there are 5 false gospels within the evangelical church, I need to tell you, Penna, there are a lot more than that. But I chose these because they oftentimes don't get the attention that they deserve. Let's talk about the gospel of social justice, where somehow the work of the kingdom now is bringing justice, and social justice can be defined in ways that we might agree with. It's very fluid in its definition. But the point that I make is this: social justice at its best is not the gospel. The gospel is Jesus Christ dying for sinners. It's not what we can do for Jesus, but what Jesus has done for us, that if we humble ourselves and receive the free gift of eternal life that was purchased for us, this will result definitely in a social conscience. Look at all the hospitals in Africa, all built by missionaries. So we've always, as Christians, been doing social work. The point is that we must remember that flows from a relationship with Christ. And yet you have millennials going out there doing social justice things, thinking that they are spreading the gospel, and they're not.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you look at a church, and I think a lot of churches that are good in they're biblical, Bible-believing churches, and they are emphasizing good works out in the community, but they're not doing it to the detriment of the the personal relationship with Christ. So it's a good trend if it doesn't take you totally away from the main thing, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, Jesus said, people will see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So there are many people who are involved in these social justice issues who have not abandoned the gospel of personal conversion. So we can't paint here with a broad brush, but there are those who definitely have given up on the gospel of personal conversion, and they're all into social justice.
I said we'd be talking about... Oh, excuse me, but we've got a break, Dr. Lutzer. Next up, we're going to do what you had hoped we'd do and talk about immigration, talk about a hot-button issue. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Liberty Christian Center in Watertown, New York, asked for permission to use the Watertown High School cafeteria for its religious services. As their application stated, the worship services to be conducted in the public school cafeteria would include activities of music, religious instruction, and Christian testimony. But the local school board denied the application, stating that since New York law did not specifically authorize religious organizations to utilize public school buildings, the application had to be denied. The court reviewed previous uses of the public school cafeteria. It found that among other uses, the school had been used to host a local talent night, which featured religious music, religious instruction, and even Christian testimony. Since both the worship service and the local talent show shared a religious purpose and context, it was unlawful for the school to permit the talent show but deny the use of the facility for a worship service. Some decry the use of a public school by a religious organization as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. That is simply not true. The First Amendment demands that a school board be neutral toward religion. Letting a secular organization use school property but denying a religious organization the same use is not neutrality, it's hostility. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. Dr. Erwin Lutzer is my guest, and I've got to say, of course, you can hear my laryngitis, and thank you, everybody, for tea and water and all the things that are helping. But, Dr. Lutzer, one of the kind of blessings of this is that I had a kind of a down weekend, and actually even late last week, I just read the book cover to cover, like I would just read a book curled up to absorb and enjoy. And that's why I'm not taking all the calls that are coming in, because I kind of know whether they will fit or not with the discussion. So, but we are taking your calls, 800-351-1212. I want to let you mention about getting the book. You can get it through pointofview.net and just click through, but Dr. Lutzer, I know you've got sort of a source too.
Yeah, people can go to moodymedia.org. It's very easy to remember, all one word, moodymedia.org. They can also call 1-800-215-5001. And I'll say that again, moodymedia.org or 1-800-215-5001. Penna, I believe so deeply about this book because as I was writing it, struggling with it, it deals with so many issues. I gave the book to Jesus. And I said, Jesus, this is your book. And so I'd wake up in the morning and say, what do you want to say to your church today? And so I'm so glad that it's been well received. And thank you so much for having me today on your program. And, of course, we do want to talk about immigration, I'm sure.
We do. And, because the chapter on immigration, and it's called Islam, Immigration and the Church, Balancing Compassion and Security, I feel the book is very balanced on many issues, including these. And there's so much confusion, and people throw around what the role of the church is, what the role of the government is on especially immigration. But there are different roles for the church and the government, aren't there?
There really are. First of all, the reason I include Islam is I discovered that Islam has a very well thought out view of immigration going back to Muhammad. Immigration for the radicals, not for all Muslims, of course, but for the radicals is actually a form of jihad. That's the way you spread the faith. When the FBI uncovered the Brotherhood's role for America, they had the list of things that the Muslims had written out. And number one was the expansion of Islam through immigration, through the building of mosques, etc. But the real reason I wrote the chapter is this. I heard a pastor say, in effect, the gospel says whosoever will may come. So the church should really say, so the state should really say whosoever will may come. And we ought to just open our borders and welcome everybody into America. I think this is so wrong. It's an unclear amount of thinking. What we must understand is that the role of the church is to welcome everyone. And I give examples of how the churches of America, and there are specific churches that are welcoming refugees and Syrian refugees. I know about this, and every church should be doing that. That is not the role of the state. The role of the state is to keep order. The symbol of the state in the New Testament is the sword. The symbol of the church is the cross. And if we don't keep those distinct, we're going to be saying foolish things like, well, Jesus was a refugee. His parents took him to Egypt. What in the world does that have to do with American national policy? First of all, we don't know that they broke any laws. And second, that is not a template for American policy. Or even Israel. There were foreigners allowed in Israel. Well, first of all, they were proselytes. They had to convert to the Jewish religion. But secondly, Israel is not America. Now, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is there's nothing in the Bible to suggest that a state does not have the right to determine who comes into its borders. And in my book, I point out that when America was founded and you have all those immigrants coming from Europe, there were indeed certain standards that they had to meet. And even if they had a disease, many people were turned back and sent back to Europe. So the idea that somehow in our history we've always been able to welcome everybody for every reason under any circumstance is simply not true. The responsibility of the state is to keep order, to have secure borders, and let those who criticize those of us who believe in secure borders, please don't tell us that we are uncompassionate and we don't care about mothers and children and so forth. I've been in Cook County Jail here visiting someone, and I saw right there before my eyes parents separated from their children. So we live in a fallen world, but it is the responsibility of the government. So let's keep that straight. The gospel is for everyone. When Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan, The Good Samaritan didn't ask the wounded man, what religion are you? Are you here legally? He saw someone he should help, and he helped him. That's our privilege. That is not the role of the state. When the state can be compassionate, fine, but you cannot run a state on compassion.
You did include Islam in this chapter, and in one sense, we look at Islam as a threat, in a sense, Dr. Lutzer, often, and they have tactics for spreading Islam, etc. So we have to understand what Islam is, but we also, in a sense, have a role to play for the Muslims that show up in our lives, don't we?
Oh, exactly. That's why in the book I give an example of an organization I know that is ministering to Syrian refugees, to Muslims. And they've built such good relationships with these people. They are praying in the name of Jesus in Muslim homes. They are in one another's homes. That's the privilege of the church. And so the church says, no matter who you are, we're here for you. We're building bridges. We're going to share the gospel. But the state runs under different rules, different laws, and we have to keep that distinct, or else we begin to say foolish things.
Dr. Lutzer, I'm so grateful you wrote the book. I recommend it to everyone listening, really, as a tool to live in this culture. If you are a pastor or a leader, it would be especially important for you. But Dr. Lutzer, I want to give you just kind of an opportunity to wrap up something that we've missed. Anything that you think our listeners would benefit from hearing here at the end of the interview. And I really hope that you'll come back, because I'm frustrated in that there's so much that we didn't get to cover.
Well, I would just say that one of the concluding chapters is on Jesus, who's outside the church door in Laodicea. You know, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Jesus is outside of the door of the church, so I discuss, how did he get outside of the church? How do we invite him back in? And then the last chapter of the book is those elements that are absolutely necessary if we're going to survive Babylon. And what I try to do is to emphasize the need for people, the need for courage, for Bible teaching, for balanced teaching, not just all the positive aspects of Christianity, an understanding of suffering, and so forth. So the point that to be made is that it is so important for us at this moment not to curl up and to say, well, we're hiding from the culture. No, we have to be invested in the culture, but we need to know where to draw the line. And here's the critical thing. Whatever good we do always has to be gospel-driven. We should be driven by our desire for redemption as it is given to us in Jesus Christ.
Dr. Erwin Lutzer, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, next up, we've got a lot more.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing, he had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife Jenny was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View, and our thanks to Dr. Erwin Lutzer. Great interview, great book that he has written, The Church in Babylon. I recommend it. You can find out more by going to pointofview.net. We're open lines for the next 30 minutes. We're taking your calls, 800-351-1212. We did get one call, a caller who did not want to be on the air but had a question. Since we discussed at length the issue of transgender, she wanted to know, how do you discuss it with your children who are asking? And I think it depends. If they're asking because they're thinking they might be the opposite sex, then I think you need to get them professional help and begin the process. Some kind of counseling that's Christian that will help them to understand the creation of their bodies. And you, as a parent, have the responsibility to help them through this. For most kids, it's a stage, and they need to be given some rope, in a sense, to just work it through. Most kids, and I think the figure is like 80%, that express some kind of discomfort with their sex when they're a child, they get over it and they go on to just live a normal life in the sex of their birth. The thing that's a child abuse is for parents to jump on board right away, and the medical community, unfortunately, is encouraging this right now, at least the mainstream medical community, with first the puberty blockers, and then hormones, and then sometimes surgery. So you do things, even with the puberty blockers, I've read that they can cause infertility, they can cause osteoporosis later in life. So yes, you can stop that treatment and, not go any further with it, but you've already done irreparable damage to the child. So, and then when you start with the hormones, you do more damage, and obviously the surgery is permanent. I mean, I guess some of the surgery can be reversed, but that's very painful and certainly not complete. So, and if your kids are just asking about it, Rebecca, because they're curious, because they see it in school, then again, I think you ought to bring them back to creation, the creation story. God created them male and female. And you can talk about science too, that even if you do make certain surgical changes, you don't change a person's DNA. They're still the sex they were born with. So things like that. I think you can talk about some of the stories. There's a gentleman named Walt Hayer who writes a lot. Look him up. He's got videos, and he talks about his regret in becoming a female. He's back as a male, but of course he's got tremendous scars, physical and emotional, and he's now trying to prevent and help other people, warn them about this. There's also Dr. Michelle Cretella. She's with the American College of Pediatricians, and she says the mainstream medical community is committing child abuse. So there are some resources out there, some common sense, and so it's just good to talk about accepting what God has done, His wisdom in making you or in making your friends the way they are. And, we tend to want to play God in a lot of areas in our lives, and this is a big one. So thank you for that question. Let's go now to Zipporah in Nevada. And Zipporah, thanks for calling in. What's your question? I'm sorry I couldn't get you on with Dr. Lutzer, but the reason I didn't was because I saw your subject matter, and since I read the book, I knew it wasn't covered in the book, but let's talk about it anyway.
That's good. I'm glad you made reference to that because when they mentioned his book, and I mean, I appreciate your work, first of all. I want to say that because
thank you.
You're doing what the Scripture says to do. We're to find out what pleases the Almighty, and we're to expose everything that's against His way and His will. And so it's very refreshing to hear someone stand on the truth and proclaim it as it is written and not fear any establishment or any device of man, let me put it that way. But I had raised the issue in regards to cloning because you were talking about transgender, and what by Yah's grace and through His wisdom of His Scripture, with scientific things that have been done with the Petri dish and with the artificial insemination and all this, I do believe that a lot of those children are confused as to who they really are because they have no emotions because they didn't come by in the way the Almighty said that we are to be produced, which is through a man and a woman.
What children?
The children that, when you have women that go through scientific studies with the Petri dish, they'll take the sperm of some unknown man and then they'll take it and they'll implant it in the woman. And then
donor-conceived children.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I call it Petri dish. And then the other thing is with the cloning, when you have a scientist tampering with the DNA and everything, and they're producing these clones. And then what's bothering, you can correct me at any time, but this is just where my mind was racing.
So we don't have cloned children walking around at this point.
Well, the thing, when I say the cloned children, I consider the scientists that actually take and they mess with the DNA and then they actually implant it in the woman to grow it. And then because they're producing these people, to me, they look human, but I say subhuman because they have no emotions. The emotions are not there. And the other thing that's really ironic is that they're actually making laws to actually cover these people that would seem to be confused of their identity. And as believers, we're falling into that trap now with no excuse and trying to think, well, maybe that's what's wrong. And that's why I had raised the second issue of child molestation, because if a child is interrupted with that sexual thing, be it by a male or another female, it does breed some kind of mental confusion within the child. And I'm a product of that. That's why I'm speaking in that regard. So I know that it can affect you mentally as a child because they shouldn't have to go through that and not really knowing who they are in the first place at a young age like that. So they grow up confused. And so that's why I threw these two questions.
I'm so sorry to hear about what you experienced. And I can only imagine how it would affect you growing up. And if your child was molested, that would be another opportunity, I think, to get some really good Christian help, counseling, because, I think a lot of the confusion about gender and even the homosexuality and lesbianism that's out there has to do with molestation in childhood at times. Yeah. But on the other question about...
Can I interject there? Can I interject right
sure.
there?
We only have a few seconds.
Yeah, that's where Satan uses to confuse because he doesn't agree with the way the Almighty has made things to operate anyway. So he wants to confuse the masses and to kill and to destroy. His whole thing is destroy humanity. So go ahead.
Good points, Zecora. Thank you so much for calling. We appreciate, and I think these are issues that deserve a lot more treatment. And so, probably good ideas for programming in the future. So thank you for calling in and bringing those up.
Thank you very much, Penna. I really appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, next up, we'll bring up this horrible massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. It's really sad. It's one area where, even though we're fighting as a country, the left and the right shouldn't be blaming each other for this one. This is anti-Semitism, pure and simple. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll also discuss the upcoming election, some of those issues, and we'll do it after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, in a speech at Hillsdale College, Andrew McCarthy told the story of leading the prosecution in 1993 of the terrorist cell that bombed the World Trade Center. At the time, other government officials told him that he should read nothing into the fact that all the men in the terrorist cell were Muslims. These officials explained that the terrorist actions weren't representative of Islam because, after all, it is a religion that encourages peace. The government also portrayed the leader of the terrorist cell, Omar Abdel Rahman, as a wanton killer and unbalanced lunatic. Andrew McCarthy discovered he was anything but. He was a globally renowned scholar with a doctorate in Islamic jurisprudence from a major university in Egypt. That presented a problem. Andrew McCarthy needed to know enough about Islamic interpretation to press the case. He hoped to find inconsistency between what the Quran teaches and what the leader of the terrorist cell taught. What he found was alarming. Every time Omar Abdel Rahman quoted the Quran or other Islamic sources, he quoted them accurately. When he said that scriptures command Muslims to strike terror into the hearts of Islam's enemies, the scriptures backed him up. When he said Allah enjoined all Muslims to wage war until Islamic law was established throughout the world, the scriptures backed him up. Andrew McCarthy discovered the flaw in the oft-repeated argument that Muslim terrorists are perverting the religion of Islam. They are accurately quoting verses from the Quran. That doesn't mean that all Muslims will be terrorists. Many do not even know of these passages or have been able to contextualize them. But it does illustrate why we cannot continually argue that radical Muslims who are calling for jihad are teaching something that is contrary to Islam. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I mentioned the attack, the horrible massacre. Really, 11 people died in this shooting in the synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's called Tree of Life. And it's amazing to hear, in various places after that, the Washington Post was blaming Donald Trump for it. I think this is one time when you just don't blame the right or the left, because anti-Semitism has been a problem forever. Although in America, I think, our record is actually fairly good. And when you hear something like this, it's a bit surprising. But really, 400 years of respect for Judaism coming, and really certainly the Judeo-Christian values in this country, the way that our country was formed, it was formed on those types of values. And also we've shown and demonstrated our respect for the Jewish state, and we support Israel, and have even moved our embassy now to Jerusalem under Donald Trump. So I don't know. The Wall Street Journal calls these liberals who are blaming Trump for this shooting the blame artists. They have to blame. They've got to use every situation as something to advance their agenda with, and this is just such a sad one. And it's a shame that they're doing that. The Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, said the U.S. has seen an increase in anti-Semitic acts, which is true, in recent years, but there are still fewer in America than in most of the world. And, of course, the president is going to visit Pittsburgh. And when you start blaming him, remember that his daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner are Orthodox Jews. Ivanka converted, and he's welcomed with open arms that situation in his family. and in fact, has supported Israel and is the first president brave enough to actually move the embassy. So that is just, we'll be praying, of course. I mean, it's just sad to think of going to church on Sunday morning or going to synagogue and, expecting to worship and having something like that happen. I did read that the 11 people were all 53 and older, up to 97. And it was because it was a little bit before the service. And the regulars who just tended to get there early were sitting there, and others were just arriving. And so those are the people that were shot. Very sad. Our hearts go out. A couple other pieces of news I want to mention is the Gosnell movie, which we've talked about at length here on Point of View. And it was basically about Kermit Gosnell and his 30-plus years as an abortion doctor, awful things that took place in his clinic, including murder, which he was convicted of. And the movie had so many obstacles in making it and getting it out, and it's actually been going into its third week now. It's hanging on. So that's good news, and if you haven't seen it, you may want to. And let me go then to the elections, because it's coming. In fact, the GOP, as you know, sort of made an October comeback. And now that we're ending October, we can sort of talk about it. But I think as we moved into that month, of course, the Kavanaugh debacle, it turned out to be a confirmation, but before that it was so embarrassing. And I think the way that the left acted in that was part of the reason that the Republicans got enthusiasm for the election. The Democrats already had it because of Trump. And, excuse me, the confirmation battle sort of accelerated a trend that was already underway, that the Republicans were getting more engaged. So now we've got these races. For instance, the Senate, it seems like more and more likely that Republicans will retain the Senate, perhaps even gain seats there. One state to look at, of course, is Tennessee, where Marsha Blackburn and former Governor Bredesen are in a battle. And Bredesen was ahead until October. Blackburn is now ahead by, 5 or 6 points, I think, in most polls. But one of the things that happened was the Veritas group, headed by James O'Keefe, had released some videos exposing Bredesen's deceiving the voters in his campaign. Discussions about that, on whether he'd support Kavanaugh. He said publicly that he would, because he knew citizens supported that in Tennessee. But behind the scenes, he did not support Kavanaugh. In fact, said he would have voted against him. So that was made public, and I think that hurt him. And then, excuse me, those videos were also taken, the videographers and that sort of team of reporters that James O'Keefe leads, into Claire McCaskill, Missouri's office. She presents herself as a moderate because that's really the composition of the state of Missouri. She's a Democrat, but on most issues, she's really with Barack Obama. She takes his position on gun control, Planned Parenthood, impeaching Trump, and she really has to appease moderate voters. And some of her statements and those of her campaign were caught on tape by James O'Keefe and company. And basically they conveyed the message that she and Obama support the same things, but quote unquote from her campaign, people just can't know that. So now she's neck and neck with the Attorney General of Missouri, Josh Hawley. And there are other races out there. You guys are reading about them in the news, but there's a lot at stake, and both the Senate and the House. And, you know that, if the Democrats get the House, there will be impeachment proceedings. They'll at least attempt to impeach the president, and we'll have to go through that as a country. So that's one of the reasons I think that people who have strong opinions about this election and people who love this country ought to consider getting very involved here, either early voting, bringing people to vote, and encouraging their friends and family to take an educated look. And you can do that by going to pointofview.net. We've got all kinds of information for you as voters. And wherever you are, wherever you live. You can find out about your candidates and their positions on things and the way they've answered these voter guides. It's really a tool for you, and we have gone to a lot of work here at Point of View to put this together. I'm not taking credit, but I will say that we've got folks here that have done the work, and it's there for you to help you. We want you to be an informed voter. And there's one more little piece of news about the election. It's from the Daily Signal. Hans Vance Ginn, and his piece says the latest absurd claim from the left is that requiring voter registration is voter suppression, is a voter suppression tool. And this accusation is being made big time right now in the state of Georgia, where there's a governor's race that's very, very close. Stacey Abrams, who's the Democrat candidate for governor, is accusing the Republican candidate and current Secretary of State Brian Kemp of voter suppression simply for complying with the law. Of course, since he's Secretary of State, he runs elections, and you have to have certain voter registration information, a driver's license, a state ID card, or Social Security record there. And if people didn't have that, she's calling it voter suppression. But really what happens, and this is the truth, is that if you have this lack of these documents, you still get to vote, and a pending status is put on your vote. It's until these can be obtained. You're not prevented from voting, but your vote's going to count only when you get the government photo ID that matches the registration application, and when that gets straightened out. So it's not voter suppression. It's requiring people to identify who they are to be voters. Voting is a privilege, and to ID yourself, some states aren't allowed to have voter ID, like here in Texas, but or picture ID for voting. But in states where they've actually wisely passed those laws, it's wise for them to be enforced and actually protects citizens. Well, ladies and gentlemen, next up, I am going to bring in another guest who's written a book called Trump Aftershock, and it's the president's seismic impact on the culture and faith in America. It's written by Steve Strang, and he's been watching this president and what has been done and accomplished, and he's written a book about it. We're going to talk about it, and we'll take your calls. You can weigh in on this, too, at 800-351-1212. I do want to mention that at our website, we've got resources for you, not only the Take Action and all the voter information, but our articles. And the one by Hans Vance Ginn from Daily Signal is there. And I put another one up. We didn't get to discuss it, but it has to do with the caravan. And since Dr. Lutzer did talk about immigration and how the church and the state really have different roles in immigration, I thought that was a very clear presentation of that issue. We've got this caravan coming north of about 1,000, actually about 1,000 miles away, I guess. Maybe they're even closer by now. But all these illegal would-be immigrants into the United States are on their way. The government does have a role to play, ladies and gentlemen. We've got an article about that. So stay with us. We've got a lot more here at Point of View.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
As promised, we're going to talk about the president, Donald Trump, and a new book out, Trump Aftershock. And with me to discuss that and really the accomplishments of this administration is Stephen Strang. He's been a guest before because he wrote another book about Donald Trump. He's gotten right on the task. And Steve Strang is the best-selling author of God and Donald Trump. And he's the CEO and founder of Charisma Media. He was also voted by Time Magazine as one of the most influential evangelicals in America, and he's been a guest on a lot of media. Steve, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for the privilege.
Well, it's good to have you, and I know we talked. You joined me to talk about your first book, God and Donald Trump, and then it was so cool when the president actually had the book with him when he went to Davos, Switzerland, didn't he?
That was cool and a total surprise. Actually, he didn't have the book with him. A lady there handed it to him when he came into Davos. I wasn't there, but I saw it all on social media. People followed him around like he was a rock star. You know, if you'll remember, the left was all criticizing him and saying that, you know, the people at Davos would eat him alive because they, you know, figuratively speaking, that they didn't like him. He came in like a rock star, and everybody was following him around with their iPhones, you know, recording the event. And this lady, he was on his way to talk to Benjamin Netanyahu, the best we can piece it together. And she handed him the book. He signed it and handed it back to her, and she handed it back to him, and he held it up for all to see. I was on Fox and Friends about 5 days before, and someone said that he watches Fox and Friends. I had no evidence at all that he did, but my guess is he saw the book, it looked familiar, and he held it up. But it was great publicity for us, and of course we were totally shocked.
Well, I think just knowing this president, that to see a book about him called God and Donald Trump, he would definitely hold that one up.
I think so, but you know, it's kind of funny. The press was from around the world, and one of the press put that he held up a book called God, Donald Trump, as if he was calling himself God. Now, on the cover, the word "and" is smaller, and at a distance, I guess I couldn't see it. Interestingly, there was a very quick correction, and of course, nobody else picked it up, but I thought that was kind of funny.
Well,
it shows you the bias on the left.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I just, it's just been interesting to watch this president, and that's what your book is about, of course, Trump Aftershock, what he's accomplished in 500 days of his presidency. But in the hour preceding this one, I interviewed Dr. Erwin Lutzer, who you probably are familiar with, and he's written a book called The Church in Babylon. And, you know, I just, it kind of made me think about the evangelicals who advise the president getting so much criticism because he's not exactly like them in his personal life, or hasn't been in the, you know, the years and decades earlier. And, you know, it just kind of made me think about how people can come to a point where they advise those in leadership. They don't have to exactly agree with them. For instance, he was talking about in the book of Daniel, and Daniel himself, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were groomed to be in the court of the king, to help him, to advise him, and they found it possible, even within their faith, to do so to a point. There were places where they had to draw the line, of course, and we talked about that at length in the last hour. But so when you look at, and I know you know many of the people who advise the president, I mean, is that how you see it, in a sense that, well, they don't have to agree with everything he's ever done in his whole life, but they can still certainly help him and help our country by doing that?
Of course. And Dr. James Dobson said to me personally that no president in, you know, since he's been visiting with presidents since around, you know, early in the Reagan administration, has been as open to Christian leadership as this. Pastor Jeffress, the pastor of the great First Baptist Church in Dallas, said that Donald Trump may not be the most religious president we've ever had, but he is certainly the most pro-religion. And, we don't really know what goes on privately, because if you're advising the president, they don't want you to go out and walk to the nearest microphone and trumpet everything you said privately. But, there have been, if you'll remember, at one time, there was a lot of really nasty stuff coming out of the White House. And remember Scaramucci? Now, Scaramucci is a great fan of the president. In fact, he recently wrote a book himself. But he gave that really, really nasty interview to one of the secular, it was Esquire or one of those, I don't remember exactly. And he was like out on his ear. Now, I am speculating, 100% speculating, that some of his advisors said to the president, you cannot have people talking like that. I mean, he was using the F-bomb and everything else, if you can, believe the transcripts. Interestingly, he is still an advocate of the president. Now, Right Wing Watch must be paying attention to me, because I made that statement on one of the Christian TV shows, and they really made fun of me over it. I don't really care. But, we're speculating about what goes on. But isn't it wonderful that he's even listening? He has them pray for him. What president has ever had people pray for him? I have been around both Presidents Bush, and I had a meeting one time with President Obama. And in those settings, there was never even prayer offered. Yet, when Pastor Brunson got back from Turkey, he met with the president and asked if he could pray for him, and the president, submitted to it and seemed to appreciate it. There's a lot of videos on YouTube of where Christians, usually they're charismatics like me, that are, kind of praying in the Pentecostal style with their hands raised, and they put their hand on the president. I didn't think you were supposed to even touch anybody that important. But they would pray, and he seemed to like it. It happened not one time, but many times. And I think that it shows that he's tender to the things of the Lord. In fact, not long ago, it was reported, not widely, but it was reported that he actually had a state dinner, and it was to show appreciation to evangelical leaders and respect. I mean, Obama did not have that kind of respect, certainly not Clinton. And even the Bushes, came after our vote, was real nice, and then when they were in office, they barely had time to even talk to any Christians, let alone have a state dinner. And after the state dinner, I wasn't there, but, people have reported to me what happened. Instead of having a program in which Trump got up and talked to them about whatever was important, he said, I want to hear from you. I want to here's a microphone. Now, don't be real long, he said, because he knew there were a bunch of preachers. But he said, come up and share what's on your heart. I think that this shows what's really going on with the president, because about 15 years ago, he started watching Christian television. Now, who would guess? But I know I've had people tell me personally that he watched Kenneth and Gloria Copeland. He watched Paula White. He watched Dr. Jeremiah. And he even told Jim Baker that he watched Jim Baker. And you've got to have an interest in the things of the Lord to even want to watch. And I think that in his home or Mar-a-Lago or wherever he was, that he was beginning to absorb this, because he was not a churchgoer, as you know. As a kid, he went to the Presbyterian Church, and as a young adult, he had some interaction with Norman Vincent Peale, who I think had a lot of influence on him. But he basically has not been a churchgoer. In fact, he's been anything but an evangelical Christian. But since when have we expected our commander-in-chief to be an evangelical Christian? Did we expect that of Nixon? I don't think so. What about LBJ? We could go right down the line. But yet there are some people that I think are kind of hypocritical. They're like, and some of us, the leftist media, I've been on some of the programs, and the thing they want to know is, how could evangelical support somebody as imperfect as Donald Trump? And I tell them, I said, look, the Bible is full of leaders that God used that were not perfect in any way. And I said the whole essence of Christianity is forgiveness. Everyone who's accepted Christ has been forgiven of things that we would not like spread all over the news media. And so we can understand that if Donald Trump has accepted Christ, that he's been forgiven, and we can forgive him. And Allison Camarado said to me, well, doesn't your Bible say you have to ask for forgiveness? Because you remember one time Trump said he never asked for forgiveness. I think he didn't really realize it was a gotcha theological question, but I mean, it's quoted again and again. And I said to her, I'm glad you're quoting the Bible. And then I went on, and they gave me a wonderful opportunity to share the gospel in a way that usually doesn't happen on secular television.
Wow, fantastic. Hey, listen, Steve, we're coming up on a break. When we get back, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to dig in a little bit to some of the accomplishments of this president that Steve, well, the book is great because it's got charts, it's got chapters on everything that has been done as far as the booming economy, all the way from that to religious liberty. So we'll talk about all of that after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Liberty Christian Center in Watertown, New York, asked for permission to use the Watertown High School cafeteria for its religious services. As their application stated, the worship services to be conducted in the public school cafeteria would include activities of music, religious instruction, and Christian testimony. But the local school board denied the application, stating that since New York law did not specifically authorize religious organizations to utilize public school buildings, the application had to be denied. The court reviewed previous uses of the public school cafeteria. It found that among other uses, the school had been used to host a local talent night, which featured religious music, religious instruction, and even Christian testimony. Since both the worship service and the local talent show shared a religious purpose and context, it was unlawful for the school to permit the talent show but deny the use of the facility for a worship service. Some decry the use of a public school by a religious organization as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. That is simply not true. The First Amendment demands that a school board be neutral toward religion. Letting a secular organization use school property but denying a religious organization the same use is not neutrality, it's hostility. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm looking at Steve Strang's book, Trump Aftershock, the President's Seismic Impact on Culture and Faith in America. And, I mean, I guess one chapter that comes to mind first of all is the one about Trump's booming economy. Steve Strang, the author of this book, is with me. And Steve, we've had 3.5% third quarter growth just reported. It's just the good news keeps coming, doesn't it?
It really does. And if you remember that during the campaign, when Donald Trump talked about some of this stuff, the other side made fun of him and said he was hallucinating or something like that. And I remember right around the time of the election that all the pundits on TV were just saying that the stock market was going to crash. Exactly the opposite happened. In fact, the stock market started taking it off before even the inauguration because people had optimism again. I mean, the Obama administration had such oppressive regulations that Trump has removed. He's cut taxes, but he's also kind of a cheerleader for America. I mean, look how he's going out and talking about having parity with some of our trading customers. I don't even remember a president talking about that. But yet, since the Second World War, we have actually been almost playing second fiddle to some of our trading partners, partly to get them on their feet financially, both Germany and Japan. I mean, they both tried to defeat us, and they were better off after we defeated them. And it's not really changed. Now, in several instances, some of which I talk about in Trump Aftershock, the president actually would sit down with South Korea and say, we're spending $1 billion a year to defend you from North Korea, and you're not paying. And the president of South Korea says, well, nobody asked us to. Same thing happened in Saudi Arabia and even in Germany. And isn't it interesting, just bringing it up, these countries were willing to pay. Of course, they weren't going to pay if we did, if we paid it for them. But us supporting them has actually made the deficit go up. It's added with everything else. And this president is clear thinking. He's a businessman. He's not the normal politician who thinks like all the normal politicians. And as a result, the economy is booming and optimism is high. I run a business and I know what it is, all the regulations, and in publishing we have a fraction of the regulations of some of the industries, but I know it's just bothersome to have to fill out all the reports and all the rules
Expensive
and everything
too.
else. And so thankfully he's taken that off, and I expect that the economy will continue to boom because America is a great country. We've got a lot of resources. We've got an educated, motivated workforce, and boy, we're getting government off our back, and we're seeing what's happened.
I think one of the things is that, and you talk a lot about the media and fake news and all of that, but the opposition that this president faces for everything that he tries to do, he puts blinders on sometimes and just goes ahead and does it. And I think one of the biggest roadblocks that was thrown recently, and I know that the justice issue was one of the big issues and reasons for evangelicals' support of this president during the campaign. But did even you think that they would throw opposition to a Supreme Court nominee the way they did with Judge Kavanaugh, now Justice Kavanaugh?
Well, in a way, if we look at history, we remember what they did to Bork. If Bork had been on the Supreme Court, same-sex marriage would not have gone through. They did the same thing to Clarence Thomas. Of course, he made it through. Neil Gorsuch, they opposed, but Neil Gorsuch was replacing a conservative judge, and so, the balance stayed about the same. Interestingly, Judge Kavanaugh is kind of a middle-of-the-road Republican. He was a George W. Bush appointee, if you remember. He's a good man. He's a good jurist. But, there were some of the conservatives that thought maybe he wasn't conservative enough. I think this president is smarter than everybody else, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Because if they would attack a middle-of-the-road Republican like a Judge Kavanaugh, what would they do if he put in a real conservative? But the left showed their true colors. They did everything in the world. First of all, they opposed him without even knowing his name. Remember that? They had fill-in-the-blank placards. Then they did everything they could from his record and everything else. They couldn't find anything. So at the last minute, they threw this hand grenade, thinking, I think they thought that Judge Kavanaugh would just throw up his hands and say, I'm out of here. And that would have been defeating
I think that
him.
was part of the plan. Either that or Trump would give up on it.
That's right. And any other president would have. I think Bush or Obama would have said, hey, we can appoint somebody else. But Trump was strong. And in the process, look how he gave a backbone to people like Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and other, kind of middle of the road or, slightly left of center Republicans that seem to have their own agenda. But boy, that unified the Republicans, and the Republican Party is in a lot of ways not that different than the Democrats, frankly. But, we just have one choice or the other, and at least the Republicans seem to side with Christians on some of the important issues, and they but anyway, I think that he's winning over the Republicans. I think he's doing a lot to get rid of the deep state. I talk about all this kind of stuff in Trump Aftershock using the imagery that if his election was an earthquake, which it was, and thank God he stopped Hillary Clinton, who is probably the most corrupt person ever to run for president. But after that election, he has performed in ways that we never expected. A lot of us who, I supported Ted Cruz originally because we didn't know what Trump would do. He was for abortion at some point, and then he was against it. Would he be a true conservative? But yet he's probably been as conservative or maybe even more so than Ronald Reagan, in my opinion.
You mentioned fake news, and I know you cover that a lot in the book. And for instance, whenever there's anything that happens, Trump is blamed by the media. So with last week's bomb packages that were sent out to different people on the left and people that Trump has opposed, of course, he was blamed again. But if you really look at his actions with that, it was incredible efficiency. It's already been dealt with, hasn't it?
That's right. And remember that a backer of Bernie Sanders would have killed all those Republicans had those guards not been there and taken him out. And nobody really blamed Bernie Sanders. It does make you think that he's got, some nutcases following him. But, obviously so did Trump. And there's no way Donald Trump motivated that guy. Somebody tried to shoot Ronald Reagan. John Kennedy was assassinated. We've had fruit cases throughout American history. What about Gerald Ford? Remember that lady named Squeaky who tried to kill him? And it's sad. It is sad, 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 sad. But, President McKinley was killed. President Garfield was assassinated. And there's some kind of evil core that keeps popping up its ugly head. But the left will take anything that Donald Trump does, and every single day they say, this is finally it. The other things didn't bring him down, but this is going to bring him down, or he's done it now. And I think that people are beginning to get tired of it. I was trained as a secular journalist. I worked as a secular journalist in my early career, and it was very, very liberal back then. And I frankly did not want to claw my way to the top. And frankly, as an evangelical Christian,
you started Charisma. That's a great story. Instead, you started Charisma. Listen, Steve, I've got to let you go because we're about on the end of the show. But I want to thank you for joining me today and for Trump Aftershock. Ladies and gentlemen, you can get it at pointofview.net. Just click through. We've got it up there. And I recommend it because it'll give you some facts for once about the accomplishments of this president. Something that you might want to take advantage of. So, Steve, thanks. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you tomorrow.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.